Good evening, everyone. I would say it's nice to see you all tonight, but mostly I see a blank screen, though there are a couple thumbnail pictures. Anyone out there? Oh, there's somebody. Thank you. Everyone hearing me okay? A thumbs up in the chat or a clap or something. Thanks, Serena. All right, okay, there we go. A couple people paying attention, thanks. Welcome, this is the CV workshop. This is part of the residency preparation series, though it certainly applies to everyone. We are recording, looks like, yep, we're recording. So we'll post this afterwards for those, if there are people that weren't able to attend. But thank you for joining on this evening. So let me share my screen. All right. So I reviewed quite a few, maybe 30 or 40 CVs leading up to this, mostly P4s. If you sent me your CV and did not get a review, please send it back to me after tonight's session. If you make some additional changes and modifications, please don't hesitate to send it back to me. For those of you that I did review, please know that I went through it looking for things like formatting, was this in the right section, use of the page white space, a little bit of the descriptions. We'll talk about descriptions at length. I did not review the content with a very intense focus. So please, take a look at what you wrote for your descriptions after the session tonight in particular, and consider, revising that. Or again, you can send it back to me, send it to another faculty member, your advisor, whomever it might be, to get some focused feedback on those descriptions. So I didn't really go into a lot of depth on them. I might have said you could use a description here, or this description is too long, or maybe change your verbiage around. But I didn't really get into the nitty gritty of what was in there. Okay. So first and foremost, what is a CV? And I wrote some notes out for myself, so I apologize. Just want to open those up. So CVs, everyone sent me their CVs. Nobody sent me a resume and said it was a CV, which is fine. That typically happens. Please know that there is a difference between a resume and a CV. I would encourage all of you to have a copy of both of them that you keep updated, especially at this point in your career. If you're a P4 going towards residency or fellowship training, as this session is geared towards, a CV is an absolute must, and you will be submitting your CV towards all of your applications. A resume, though, is a really good idea if you'll be submitting to any jobs. So typically, jobs in a variety of settings, community pharmacy, managed care pharmacy, many independent pharmacies, even hospital pharmacy, depending on the role that you might be taking, is going to look for a resume. Or they might say, submit your resume/CV. When you see that, I would always err on the resume side, because a resume is just a quick one-page snapshot of you as a candidate for that particular job. And that's one thing that you really want to think about with a resume is, how do I highlight my skills and my experiences for this position? So you're going to do a lot of revising for the resume for each position that you apply to. On the flip side, a CV can be as long as it needs to be. Longer does not mean better. And in many cases, I would say shorter means better. But so don't just make it long for the sake of making it long. But a CV is just a listing of all the stuff that you've done, right? And so a true CV is just, well, I went to this school, I got this degree, I have these licenses, I took these clerkships, I have these abstract presentations, right? It's just a listing of things that you've done. It's a bit more boring, right? A resume should be more eye-catching, should be more kind of inspiring, maybe for lack of a better word. And so the CV is really just a list. I'm getting A chat question. Yeah, so if you haven't sent your CV yet, yeah, you can still send it to me. I'll still review it, especially after the session tonight. Certainly make changes to it based on the things we talk about tonight. And then if you send it to me, I can certainly still review it. And if you want to create a resume, or if you have a resume, you want me to look at that too, I'm happy to do that as well. So this is really focused on CV. So again, don't be afraid to have both a resume and a CV. I do have an example of a resume somewhere that I can show. Maybe. Okay, let me just make sure I share the right. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so this is a resume, right? This is one page. This is my wife. She's okay with me sharing it, hopefully. I wrote most of it, so she's okay with me sharing it. It's one page, right? And it's really focused on an objective, so what you want to get out of the position that you're applying to, and what experience you have that links to that particular position. So this is where the descriptions come from, and so this is why I think it's useful to talk about a little bit. These descriptions on a CV, that's from a resume. So a true CV, if you look at my CV, there's no descriptions, right? I don't need to describe these things. It's just a list. For pharmacy students and candidates for residency fellowship jobs, they're looking at these as of like a CV/resume, and so they're looking for these kind of descriptions. So this is the type of description that you'll see on a resume as well, and it's really focused again towards the skills and experiences you have that apply to that position that you're interviewing for. No more than a page max, right? Front of one page. Okay, so it has to be formatted in a way that's easy to follow, that's clear, it's concise. And you're really narrowing down the information you provide. So you're deleting a lot of stuff from your resume. I'm not saying this is the prettiest example, but it is just an example. Okay, so back to CVs. So, okay, so here's the template that everyone should have gotten. If you didn't get the template, let me know and I can send it back out. This is just an example. There were many variations on this and other templates as well that folks used. The goal for the formatting in the template is to make good use of the page. So you don't want to have huge gaps of white space. And you also don't want to have it be super condensed, right? And so especially if you're going to use descriptions, I encourage you to use bulleted descriptions because that really draws someone's eye to what to look at when they're reading through the CV. Having a paragraph or a big block of lettering and writing, it's really hard to draw you into that. It's like, I don't want to read through a couple paragraphs to figure this out. But if I read short bulleted statements, even if it's the same length, it just seems better in your mind. Other formatting things, don't go narrow margins, about an inch, minimum font size 11, keep it all consistent, right? So keep your font type, keep your font size, everything consistent throughout. Some people would have like the dates as a smaller size. Don't do that. Keep everything the same size within the section, right? So this is all whatever, size 12 or size 11. If you want to make your headings a little bit bigger, that's fine. But the text all needs to stay the same size. Everything should essentially be the same font as well. So don't change fonts throughout. Consistency. That's the biggest thing for formatting, right? So here in this example, right, the headings are bold with a line below them and in all caps, right? That's every single heading, right? Subheadings are bold, underlined with capitalizations of the letters that are appropriate to capitalize, right? So you can quickly draw to, okay, this is the main section, this is the subsection, this is the action or activity within that subsection, right? So the information is clearly presented. You can use tabs as well, right? So this has, one tab over at the half-inch mark. You could tab this over. You could, if you tab that over, I would suggest tabbing the next thing over, right? So then you're starting to not use as much white space. Even this example, I think, probably these types of activities don't need to be at the half-inch mark. They could probably be back, justified left. So you want to think about that. Again, this is more personal style, but you want to try to, again, make the most use of the page and keeping it consistent throughout. A couple of tricks with formatting. So in Microsoft Word, which is where most of us are making these, if you go into the paragraph settings, This is where you can do a lot of work with the spacing between sections, the general line spacing, as well as the indentations and the tabs. So one thing that I see a lot of people tend to do is just do like a full return through every single section, right? So there's a full return. This is more than a full return because the way I have it set, but right, that spacing, that's too much, right? That's way too much white space between lines, right? Even at a shorter space, even something like that, which is more of a single return versus a 1.5 return, even this, I could argue, is a little bit too much, right? You don't necessarily need that much. So the way that this is set up, I can go back to the way that it was, is it's called before and after spacing. So this spacing is before and after lines. So you could adjust it to be like not necessarily single space between lines. You can make it multiple. Some people do like a 1.15 as a multiple between lines. I keep it as single because in certain sections, I think it looks cleaner. But then the spacing after you can change. So you might want to make it what's called like 6 point. I think I had this at 8 point. And so that keeps it so that in between these lines, there's a little bit of room, right? It's not single space like one right on top of the other. But it's enough of a separation that you can tell that these are distinct entities, but they're not spread out by a full return. This is super type A nitpicky pharmacist stuff, but those are the types of people that are going to be reviewing your CV. And if the first thing they open it up to is like, wow, there's like a full return through every single line, this CV is 8 pages long now, like, are they just trying to space this out to make it a longer CV? That initial impression sets the stage for the rest of the evaluation of the CV, right? So you want to just keep it clean and neat and consistent again throughout. So you want to make sure that the return between each section and each subsection and each line is consistently done throughout the whole CV. So the formatting is really important. Okay, those are most of my formatting things. Oh, so the other thing in that paragraph side is the tabs, right? So again, clicked on paragraph, go into tabs. And so typically the default tabs are every ½ inch, right? So you just keep tabbing across the page, it'll be ½ inch, ½ inch. One thing you can do is do a 6.5 inch right justified tab. Okay, so what will this do, aside from screw up my formatting on this? Let me do a new one. So it does it line by line. So I don't have that on this one, and it makes it actually harder to line things up. So do a right tab. So now when I click tab, right, it takes me over to the right 6.5 inch mark, which as you can see is lined up, it's right justified, right? So 6.5 inches, because it's an 8.5 inch page, you got 1 inch margin, 6.5 inches is at the far right side. So now anything I type here at this tab lines it up perfectly down along that right margin. So if you're doing dates on the right side, rather than set them up, which is how I have it in this one, which is like space, tab, over, like, and you're trying to line them up, you're like, is that right? Could I go one more space? Sometimes they don't always line up. If you set up the whole document with a right justified 6.5 inch tab, once you get here, you just say tab over, and I'm at the 6.5 inch mark, and I can type out my date right then and there, right? And so that keeps it all clean and lined up. One of the other things with dates is to keep them consistent. So if you're going to say 2020, great. If you're going to say August 2020 and spell out August, great. If you're going to say AUG for August 2020, great. Do that the same thing throughout the whole time. You don't need dates down to the day. August 10th, 2020 through September 1st, 2020. You don't need that. Months and years are fine, I think, for most things. For something like your education, so if you want to put, 2016 through 2020, or it was 2017 through 2021 if you're P4, that's fine. You don't have to have that much detail here. But the other things, if you want to put the month down, you can put the month down. Again, just keep the way that you put the month consistent. I have a visit from my daughter here who's in the midst of eating dinner. All right, let's go through these. GPA, again, yeah, include it if it's strong. Make sure you put that it's out of 4. Some universities do weird GPAs, and it's not necessarily out of 4. These things, I don't think I have much. Professional experience, so your internship should go first. Hey, Kira. Sorry, give me a second, guys. Sorry, 2-year-old wants to play piano now. Let's see. So this format, I'm just trying to think of any notes that I have as I go through these. I'm going to talk about the descriptions in a moment. I like in this example, in this template, these sections are laid out in this order on purpose. This is how I would encourage you to try to lay out the sections: education and licensure certification, professional experience with internships, then APPEs and IPPEs. If you're a P4, you only need to include your P3 IPPEs. And even then, if you've got like a lot of really good APPEs and you've got a good internship, you don't feel obligated to include your IPPE3s. But as a P4, your 1 and 2 year IPPEs, you can delete them. You don't need them at that point. Then I would go into teaching experiences, leadership, and then research. The reason I put research third is because then right after research, you should link into things like publications, presentations, posters, and a lot of the research projects that you worked on are going to be feeding into those publications and posters and things. Professional organizations and meetings, honors and awards, community service. So again, I like those headings that flow, those types of categories. That's how I think most people are going to be accustomed to looking at it, and making sure you're not double dipping, between them. Okay, so let me go back up and talk about some content. That was a chat question. Okay, good question. So licensure certification, I don't think I have anything different. For professional experience, okay, so for internships, other relevant work experience. Again, if you want to include bulleted descriptions, I think that's fine to do. Many of you saw this same phrase in my feedback to you on your CV, which was focus on extraordinary activities and skills gained, right? If you say, I was an intern at Wegmans Pharmacy and I filled prescriptions pursuant to electronic orders from prescribers, I communicated with prescribers and insurance companies, I counseled patients on over-the-counter prescription products, I performed MTMs, you're telling the audience, who's a pharmacist, what they already know, right? Tell them something that they don't know, right? If you want to maybe have one line that says something along those lines, I performed the expected duties of a pharmacy intern in a community setting. And then you really want to highlight either skills that you gained. Every experience should give you skills. You can talk about communication skills, teamwork skills, patient counseling skills, whatever it is. Highlight skills or talk about something out of the ordinary. I created a protocol for how patients were going to flow through the pharmacy during the COVID pandemic. I started the intern-led immunization program once pharmacy interns were able to immunize. Right, so you want to highlight something that's different, something that you worked on, that you were proud of, that you want to talk about at your interview. And so again, just don't fall back on these sort of normal cookie cutter activities that anyone would assume that you did in those types of experiences. Now, that is to say, if you are applying to a community pharmacy position, you would want to highlight the skills that you have and the proficiencies and competencies that you have that are related to that particular position. And so in something like that, you may want to adjust your description to better match the job that you're applying to, and highlight, that you have a high competency in various areas of that particular community pharmacy. But again, that's delving into a little bit more of the resume side. Same thing with descriptions for APPEs. So again, you want to highlight, they know that if you're on an internal medicine rotation in a hospital, you're going to go on interdisciplinary team rounds. You're going to make drug therapy recommendations to address medication therapy problems. You're going to do renal dosing. So some of these things are skills that you can talk about. You develop skills in therapeutic drug monitoring, pharmacokinetic dose individualization, what have you. But you really want to highlight some of the unique aspects of that experience. And so think about that as you revise your descriptions. Importantly for the descriptions, the action verb that it starts with, right? You always wanted to start with an action verb. Things like developed, created, implemented, whatever it might be, whatever you did, even just to say performed, you performed medication therapy management for 50 patients a week, whatever it is. It should be an action verb that starts that bullet, and it should be in the past tense. Even if it is your current rotation, current job, it is still something you did in the past. So you want it in the past tense. And there's a couple reasons for that. The most important is that you don't want it to seem like it's something that you're still working on. So if you were to say like, oh, developing patient communication skills, they might look at that and say like, wow, you don't think as a graduating P4 student that you have good patient communication skills, right? So you want to say, I developed these things. I honed my patient communication skills in an inpatient setting for discharge counseling, whatever it might be. So past tense is important, again, even if it's a current activity. The verb that you use, think big. Don't say things like, I assisted, I helped. That implies that you maybe didn't do as much as you really did do. So I saw this on a few of the CVs that I reviewed, and I know many of you, and I know what you're doing, and I know that you're doing a lot more than assisting a pharmacist to do things, right? Oftentimes as an intern, you are doing the bulk majority of the work, and then you're bringing it to a pharmacist and saying, hey, I did this, 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 this. Are you okay with these things? And they're checking them off to approve them. So it is assumed that if you're an intern or an APPE student or an IPPE student, right, you are working under the supervision of a pharmacist. That's why you list that person as the supervisor of your job or the preceptor, whoever it is. All of these things that you do and tell us about, we know that they're done under the supervision of that pharmacist. So you don't have to say things like, I assisted the pharmacist to do this, right? Say you did this, right? You did pharmacokinetic dose individualization of vancomycin for patients on dialysis, right? That's something you would do if you were on my rotation. And yes, the pharmacist, me, or the pharmacist at ECMs where I practice, reviews that and approves that, but you're the one that's doing it, right? You're getting that experience. So don't say that you assisted me in doing it, just say that you did it. And again, think about verb types. There's actually websites that you can say like verbs for my resume, and it'll tell you use these types of action verbs to start your descriptions with. Okay, same thing for IPPEs. If you're a P4 student and you're going to include your IPPE 3s, I don't think you need a description there. You're going to have 6 to 7 APPEs with descriptions, maybe work with description. You don't need more descriptions for IPPEs. Under teaching experience, so if you give a lecture, this is the suggested format. If you're doing teaching assistant stuff, it falls under here. Tutoring stuff falls under here. I'll get to that question in a moment. I don't think there's anything else for teaching. You don't need descriptions, right? So if you give a lecture, you're a teaching assistant, you do tutoring, you don't need to have descriptions. It's, that's just to list it there. And then if you want to talk about it in the interview, that's something good to talk about in the interview. Leadership experience. So again, I would pull this out if you have any leadership experience. You were an officer, you were a committee chair, something that was elected in an organization. I would list it separately, distinctly from the other section, which is like professional organizations, right? That is not double dipping. That is highlighting a leadership role, and that is something that's very important. Right? So you want to pull that out and put it here. If you want to include a description, that is fine. This should really, really, really focus on something that is different and that you are very proud of and want to talk about and highlight. If you're the president of the organization, the like day-to-day logistics of being the president of an organization, you gathered e-board meetings, you made directives for the year, you communicated with the membership, all those kind of things, that's great, but that's expected of what you were going to be doing. So you want to highlight things. I led a fundraising effort and raised this money. I developed and implemented a new program for tutoring or something like that. So you want to highlight the things that you did that were above and beyond, and don't talk about just kind of organizational management type stuff. Okay. Research experience, again, follows that because I think it feeds nicely into the next couple of sections. This is how I suggest you format it. So the name of the project, where it was done, the principal investigator, and then your role. If you weren't the principal investigator, if you were, you can list your roles under there. So here you can just write role and then have descriptions here. just a couple bullets, the types of things did. I did design the protocol, got IRB approval for the protocol, executed the protocol, did data collection, data analysis, database management, wrote manuscript, whatever it might be, you can include it in this. Here's some examples. Publications, I prefer and strongly encourage you to use a citation format that looks like this. Actually, I want to pull up. My current CV to show you a couple things. I referred to a couple things in it. Okay, so this is what I mean by citation format. So it should be a numbered list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, most recent at top. And it should look like a citation, right? Your name should be bolded in the author block, your co-authors listed, the name of the paper. If this is an abstract, the name of the abstract, the journal that it's in. If it's an abstract, maybe the conference it was published at. A lot of people had things that were possibly in process or in progress. And for those, this is how I would recommend you do it. And so I wrote this on a few, and I wanted to make sure that I was clear in what I meant. This is my list of current publications. I don't want to change my own formatting, right? So if this is published, this is out there, you can find it. Publications that are not yet published are listed for me in a separate section, but for you can be in the same section. But what I would do is at the end, add a little parenthetical to say where it's at in the publication process, right? So for me, I put things like maybe it's in progress, right? So it's written, I'm waiting on a couple last things, and I hope to submit it soon, right? That's in progress for me. This does not mean I'm thinking of writing this paper. This means this paper is written and it will be submitted very shortly, right? Some of them are maybe submitted in review. So in review is another category. In revision, so it's been reviewed. I've gotten feedback from reviewers, and I'm revising it right now and going to be resubmitting it soon. And then the other one is in press. So like this one was accepted. It was not yet published, so it's accepted in press. And so you should be able to do that. You should feel comfortable to do that in your own publications, as well as the posters section. So again, if it's not published, just add something at the end that says like in progress, right? Expect the person that interviews you to ask, well, what's your current progress? Has it been submitted now? Where are you at? What's slowing you down? That's fine. You want to talk about that. You want to highlight your projects. You want to highlight that you plan to submit it. You want to write a journal that it's going to be submitted to, hoping that it's submitted to that journal. If it gets submitted somewhere else, or maybe it gets rejected there and resubmitted somewhere else, that's fine. That stuff happens in the publication process, but you should at least include what you're targeting for the submission of the journal. So make it look real, just say in progress or in review, or in revision, something like that at the end. If there's more than one, list them again in numerical order. And I recommend the same thing for the presentations and posters section, a numbered citation list. The citation is not as structured as it is for publications, where there's more of a clear citation format. I would, again, list the authors first, bold your name, the title of the presentation, who it was presented to, and when it was presented. You could define it a little bit further. You could say things like, case and topic presentation to pharmacy staff, right? I'm sure many of you on rotations are doing these. I know all my students do a case and topic presentation at the end of their rotation. That's a formal presentation, right? You are standing up or sitting behind your computer these days and presenting with slides and with objectives and with questions from the audience. That's a formal presentation. That is something that should go on your CV. So if you have those, you should be including them under the presentation section in a format like this. You would also want to include abstracts. So if you have abstracts that are presented at conferences, you would include them here as well. The format looks pretty similar to that. An example from mine is here. So again, author block, bold your name, name of the abstract, where it's presented, so the ACCP 2019 annual meeting, which was in New York, New York. That had an exact date, so I included it. Some abstracts are published, so there's a journal supplement that publishes the abstracts. If that's true for your abstract, you should include the citation here. If it doesn't have a citation or publication, that's fine. Just you would include basically this information here. So again, more citation format. Professional organizations now and meetings. List the groups that you're in and the dates you've been in them. If you've attended meetings that are pertinent to those groups, you could list them here. By meetings, the definition for me is maybe a little bit different than others. I expect this to be like major conferences. So the ASHP major clinical meeting, the ACCP annual meeting. It's great that you attend CE events, that you attend business meetings for regional or state level pharmacy organizations. I don't think that's the purpose of including it on a CV. I am not a strong supporter of including this part on anyone's CV. It has, for some reason, made its way into pharmacy student CVs, and now residency programs are expecting to see it because they think it shows activity in the organizations. I don't think that's the case, but that's just my opinion. Because most programs are expecting to see it, I would encourage you to include it, but again, focus on conferences. If it's a statewide conference, but it's like the annual conference for that statewide organization, that's fine, include that. But if it's like you attended the Winship CE that was an hour with dinner, that's not what we're talking about for meetings here. So we mean more sort of large stage conferences. So, just include those. You don't need any descriptions or any annotations here. Honors and awards, list here. Try to condense them if you've won the same award multiple times or you've been on the dean's list multiple times. Just put it together. You don't have to list it every single time. Just try to group it together and show it. Community service as well, anything you've done. A lot of you do wellness clinics like blood pressure clinics, flu shot clinics, poison prevention programs, all that kind of stuff counts as sort of health-related community service. Include it here. You really don't need descriptions for this. A few of you had very unique community service or volunteer activities that you had descriptions for, and when I thought it was okay, I told you it was okay. If you have a description here, it should be really, really brief, just to help the reader understand what it was, maybe what the scope of it was. So don't feel like you need to have descriptions in this section. This is just showing you another format. So with the dates on the left, that just whatever you prefer, do what you prefer. The only thing I don't like about the left dates, sometimes people tend to push the other information way over, right? So it's like you get this 2-inch gap between your dates and then the information. And then if you've got any descriptions, right, they're showing up way, way, way over here. It's like, oh, here's my description, and that's, you're not making use of white space there, right? If you've got 3 or 4 bullets, you've got all this area of white space that you're just not making good use of. So, if you do the left justified dates, just make sure you try to keep the other information, reasonably spaced, so it doesn't have to be right next to it. Dates. So reverse chronology is an important thing. So reverse chronology means most recent information at the top. This becomes a little weird for APPEs, for UP4s, because you have some that you haven't yet completed, right? So there's 2 ways to do that. One is to just say, make a separate section at the beginning, right? Like to be completed. You could also say like anticipated, something like that, right? And then list those APPEs there. 6, whatever it is. And then you can have another section that says completed. And that's where you might list the other ones that you've done. But this should still fall in reverse chronology, right? You know what those APPEs are that you're pending completion, right? So you might have some that are February to March of 2021, right? And so you know that you're scheduled for those, you're going to do those. You still want to include those on your CV, especially if you're going for residency, because they're going to want to see the types of rotations that you have in the future. But you want to list those first. The other weird thing for chronology, that is again a super type A pharmacist thing. I already typed it out. So if you have something that the dates are like 2017 through current, and then something that's got the dates like 2018 to 2019, this one actually goes on the bottom. So even though you're still doing it, whereas this one has been over for a year, this one started first. So the one that started first goes on the bottom. so that the reverse chronology refers to the first date, and you have a range of dates. So just keep that information in mind. Other minor things, abbreviations, just try to spell out all abbreviations. A few of you did a good job of defining an abbreviation in parentheses upon first use and then using it consistently throughout. The downside of that is that people don't read your reviews or read your CVs like they read a paper. That's common in a publication or a paper that you might read, but they're not going to read it that way, right? In the old days, they'd be flipping through it. Now they're scrolling through it. They might just scroll. So I want to see what rotations this person has. And they scroll to your rotations and they see all this like BGMC. What does BGMC mean? And they have to start looking back, Control F for BGMC. So just try to spell out all abbreviations throughout the CV. If it's something that's like really, really well accepted in the field and it will save you space, especially in like a description, right? If you don't want to type out medication therapy management, you just want to type MTM. You know, everyone really knows what MTM is. I would always err on the side of spell it out. But if you really think it'll help to shorten it, or it's like, oh, I could keep this on one line instead of two if I just abbreviated it, that might be okay. But try to just spell out all the other abbreviations throughout the CV. And then, what was the other thing? Oh, so a lot of you had at the end of the CV, like references available upon request. Don't need that. If you're applying to a residency, you're going to be submitting references separately anyways, same for a fellowship. If it's a job and they want references, they'll ask you, right? So I don't see the need to ever have that on the bottom of your CV. You should, for anything, have references ready. So for residency, fellowship, you should already be lining up references. If you haven't already, start to do that. Start to email, call people, ask for their, say, are you happy to provide me a good, strong reference? If you're applying to jobs, you're going to need references, right? You want to have a list of references, 4 or 5 people, their contact information all ready to go. You don't need to submit that until it's asked for, but once it's asked for, you want it ready. And these shouldn't be people that are unaware of it. You should ask these people, can I list you as a reference? I'm applying to this job. Send them your current CV. Send them why you're applying to the job. Explain to them why you think they'd be a good reference for you, the things that you did together, what you worked on. Give them some of that information. Ask them what their best contact information is, right? I'm going to give my cell phone most of the time for a reference because I'm not going to answer my office phone, especially these days. I'm not in my office, right? So those are the kind of things you want to have lined up in advance, but you don't have to list references available here. A lot of people also had like an other skills section and would have included like programs, languages, like PK software, stuff like that. That is not needed on a CV. If you were writing a resume for a job application, I would integrate those types of things onto the resume if they applied to the particular position. So if you're applying for a position in an area of, let's say like you're applying in New York City and you know that half the population in the neighborhood, in the pharmacy that you're applying to speaks a particular language and you are fluent in that language, that is an excellent thing to highlight. That would be the first thing out of my mouth on my resume and on my cover letter is, I speak this language that 50% of your customers speak, and I'm totally fluent in written and verbal communication in that language, right? You don't need to include it though on a CV. Again, if it's applicable to the job, put it on the resume, put it in the cover letter. Those types of things you don't necessarily need there. If there are skills that you have gained over your rotations or over research experience, those types of things, particularly like software skills, so people put, like proficient with ADAPT, proficient with Win non-Lin, whatever it might be. You can include those things within the pertinent sections, right? So if you learned that through research experience, that's one of the things I would put here is, develop skills in these programs. If it was on a rotation, I would put that on the rotation, right? I became proficient with using these programs for these purposes, right? You don't have to list it under other skills. Okay, I think those are most of my notes for common things that I saw. I went through all the sections. There was one question in the chat about, oh yeah, this was one thing I wanted to talk about. Sorry. Under education, would you list relevant coursework such as electives? And so this is a good question, as well as it reminds me of a couple things to talk about for that. So I would not list electives. Everyone's going to have a different mix of electives. Every program, every PharmD program across the country requires electives. So you don't have to list them here. Things you can list here, though, are micro-credentials, right? So you could list micro-credential in blah, 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 blah. Micro-credentials are a newly recognized thing in higher education. So people know what they are, they know what it means. It's not a certificate program, it's not a master's program, but it's a micro-credential, it's another form of training. We offer a lot of different micro-credentials. The Scholars Program is one, the Clinical Research Program is one, there's an interprofessional one. There's another one that I'm forgetting about that I just learned of the other day. So if you have one of those micro-credentials or are in the process of completing it, list it here. So I have micro-credential in clinical pharmacy research. That highlights it as part of your degree. So I would put it actually right there, because it's part of your Doctor of Pharmacy degree, right? They stamp it not on your degree, but on your transcript. You get this micro-credential in whatever it is. So I would include it here. Again, I would not include elective courses, but I would include any micro-credentials here. Additionally, some people want to take opportunity to highlight that experience. If you want to, you could have a section, something like, I think we've called it like additional scholastic activity. It's something that we've recommended in the past. And then how to double my line. I don't need to. Okay, whatever it is, put the line there. And then here you can highlight things that might be, so it might, micro-credential in, clinical pharmacy research. That's just the one that I know about because it's the one that I run, right? And so as part of this, you could then say that you took PHM 551, that you took PHM 552, maybe you did an elective independent study, and then you had a project, right? You can give the title of the project, whatever. And then, if you want to say presentation, you want to include all the information about that here, that's great, right? So these are all the things that are included in that micro-credential. However, if you presented it as an abstract and did a research project and you list it all here, don't list it again in these subsequent sections. So don't list that presentation again, don't list the research experience again, right? If you want to put it all together, that's fine, right? And so different micro-credentials will have different components to it, but don't double dip into different sections. Someone else asked for the presentation section, would you put your first initial and last name under every presentation, or is it implied? I would put my name under each of them. Some of them you might have multiple authors, and so it is implied that you are the one that gave the presentation, usually. You might be like, so like this one is a presentation, it was an abstract. I was not the presenting author, typically it's the first author that presents it. So Dr. Fusco presented this one. So that tells somebody that I was an author on it, but I didn't present it. So same thing could go for you. Maybe you worked on a project and it got presented as an abstract, but you weren't the presenter. You should still include that in your author name in the block where it goes. But yeah, if you only have presentations that you gave that there were no co-authors on, I would still include your name. Because eventually you'll have other presentations that you have co-authors with that you'll want to include their names as well. So I would include your name. Oh, and then I answered Kira's question, which is if you were listed on a poster but did not actually present it, would you include that? Yes. And I would just include it where your name falls on the poster block. So if you're second, if you're third, whatever it might be, that typically tells somebody. So it's typically, again, the first author is the one that presents it. If that's not the case, you can do things like highlight the fact that you were the presenting author. So sometimes, maybe Dr. Fusco couldn't make it to this meeting, right? And so maybe I presented it, right? So you could do that. And then at the bottom, you could say presenting author to highlight who was the person that presented it. But typically it's assumed that the first author presents it. So yes, Kira, I would include those. So we're into the Q&A section. So I've talked for way too long, but I wanted to make sure I got through all those things while I remembered them. And so please ask questions in the chat. I have the chat open. Ask questions over the video. it would be nice to see somebody in quasi real life. Happy to take any questions. The silence is, I think, more awkward on Zoom than it is in the classroom. At least in the classroom, I can stare at you and make you think like I have to say something. But on Zoom, I just stare at a computer screen. I know there are questions. Come on.
Hi, I do have a question. So I think I have a micro credential or two, but I don't know what they're called. Do you know if there's a place like on the Hub Student Center where we would find if we have a micro credential?
Yeah, I think it is right on X for D micro credential programs. But even this is not, oh, global health, that's the other one that I could remember. Patient care process, global health. So even this, like, because the clinical research one is called, I think it's called the clinical pharmacy research micro-credential. Or in the clinical pharmacy research program digital badge, yes, that's what it's called. But yeah, here's the list of all of them.
Okay.
So it's the patient care process, scholars, clinical research program, and global health pharmacy. I thought we had an interprofessional one. Interprofessional one might be like UB as a whole. So there's probably a UB micro-credential programs at UB. Yeah, so there's other UB micro-credential programs.
Okay, thank you.
That you can find here, yep. Okay, other questions? Okay, so the question is about how to format the date on the right side separately from the text on the left side. So again, I would do, so you've got some, so here, and you can apply this, I'm not going to apply it to the whole document. That's how I would do it if I was starting over from scratch. You could do it even if you're not starting over from scratch. It just takes a little bit of time to adjust. If I did it to the whole document, all my dates would fly all over the place. But so what you would do is you click on the paragraph, tabs, and so I've got it already, but you want to create a 6.5-inch tab that's right justified. Again, that's if your margins are 1 inch all around. If your margins are different, which I don't think they should be, but if they are different, you want to adjust it to whatever it is. And then click OK. And then what's going to happen is when I hit tab, right, my cursor's moved all the way over to this right side. And you can type as much as you want and it'll stay. The end of it will stay at the right side. Now your tabs are probably going to look a little bit more detailed than that because you might want additional tabs. So right now I've just got a 1/2 inch and a 6.5 inch, but I might want one at tab. Maybe I want one at 1 inch as well from the left alignment, so that I can tab over. No, didn't like that. So it's already past 1 inch because you maybe want like to tab over. Let's call it 1.5 inches. So you can mess with this, right? There's a lot of Microsoft Word formatting that's kind of crazy and weird. So that tab the date over to 1.5 inch. If I do another tab, it goes over to 6.5 inch, right? So this row, there's a tab at 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5, and 6.5 right justified. So you can create multiple layers of tabs. Another question, what about research that was data collection, poster was never created, paper isn't currently written, would you still recommend adding it? Yeah, I guess it just depends on the extent of your involvement in the research process and the experience. If you felt like you gained a valuable skill from it, even if it maybe wasn't necessarily the research skills, if you did mostly data collection, but maybe you learned a lot about the topic. You were investigating an association between PPIs and acute kidney injury, whatever it might be. You still learned a lot about the topic and a lot about observational research and interpreting study designs and those kind of things. So that's great, and that's something that you can still highlight. If it's like you did it as you were P4 on rotation and on the side, the preceptor's like, oh, hey, can you help me with this data collection while you're here? And you did a couple of patients a day and you just collected some data. Maybe you spent 20 hours doing it. That's not something that you have to necessarily include as a research experience. You could just have it as like part of your APPE description that you did that. But if it was something you worked on for a more prolonged period of time, so like there's, I forget the name of it, but Dr. Woodruff has a class where students get paired with a resident at Buffalo General, and they help them with research. A lot of what they're doing is data collection. But that is a more structured, robust research experience and is part of a course. And I think that's something that could be nice to highlight under research experience. You'd put the name of the research. It was done at Buffalo General. The principal investigator would probably be the resident at that point. And then your role, you could say, I did data collection, database management, worked with a resident in a structured, mentored research environment to develop research skills. So I think that is much beefier essentially than doing a couple hours of data collection here and there. So that I would include. Somebody asked, sorry, a couple questions ago, somebody asked, how would you recommend students to get involved in research earlier on in their careers? There's lots of ways. It's a bit beyond our scope tonight, but I would say if you're interested, just send me an email and we can chat about it. There's lots of ways to get involved with research. Even as a P4, I had a P4 year before last. She was just starting her P4 year. She's like, hey, I think I'm interested in residency. I haven't done any research. I wanted to try to fill in that gap in my CV to have anything available. And she worked with me through an independent study and did research over the course of her P4 year that was really fruitful. So, it's never too late to get involved in it, but I think if you're going to think about it early on, there's lots of ways in your P2, P3, P4 years to do so.
In terms of being consistent in how we list the dates, if you have, let's say you're listing your APPs and maybe one of them started October 1st to October 30th, would you, and maybe like you've been listing as maybe September 20th to, you've been listing it that way. How would you, is it okay to put October 2020 to October 2020, or for that, is it okay to say October 1st to October 30th?
I would just keep it consistent. And if you just did it for that month, I would just list it like this. I would just say that month, 2020. If it's just in October, just say October 2020. Because many schools have different lengths of APP rotations. So places are familiar with, a 4-week rotation might just fall in 1 month. So that's fine. You don't have to give a range there to keep it consistent with the other ones. Yeah, if you sent your CV and you didn't get feedback on it, I apologize. But yeah, please just send it to me again, and I'd be happy to look at it. There are a lot of resources, right? I'm not touting to be the only person that can review a CV. There are many people that can review your CV. Your advisor is one place to start. A close faculty mentor, someone that mirrors that role, is another good place to go because they know you very well. Someone that you're on rotation with as a P4 is a great place to look for advice and guidance. I'm always happy to review them. Different professional organizations like ASHP, ACCP have CV review services that are like on demand. So you just log in. You have to be a member of the organization nationally, but if you just log in to your account, there's like a submit your CV portal, and you just put your CV file in there. A couple of days later, somebody sends you back a file with feedback on it. And so it's nice because it's not somebody from UB, it's somebody from out there in the world. And so they might think about things in a different way, and they may have different expectations. And so it's nice to see that other feedback from outside of this smaller circle at UB. So that's another good thing to do. Get feedback from multiple sources. That's a good thing as well. Like I said, I tend to look at formatting and what goes where and how is it, is it lining up? Is everything consistent? Whereas other people are going to review, they won't even look at that. They're just reading through your descriptions to make sure that they're really on point and focused and polished. And that's not something that I'm very good at. So it's good to get feedback from multiple people.
Would you recommend quantifying our experiences? Like, for example, my preceptor said that it would be good to show your impact of what you've done in your experience. Would you recommend doing that?
To what detail?
So, for example, he was like, mention the number of med racks you do a month, and then quantify that and how many med errors you may have prevented. Sometimes it's hard to do that, I think, in like community setting, but if it's possible, would you recommend doing that?
Absolutely, something like that, yes. So if you have that information, then definitely, because it shows the impact of the work that you've done, and the breadth of the work that you've done. So if you've done 50 med recs over a course of a rotation, that's great. But if you, as an intern, have done 150 med recs a month for 2.5 years, that's a totally different type of competency level. And so I think that that's a way to highlight that. And again, if you have deeper levels of analysis of that, so number of medication therapy problems identified, number of medication therapy problems resolved, that's really, really good as well. So I think if that's there, to include it. You don't have to get to that same level of detail with everything. I think that's probably specific to either an internship or maybe an APPE, because you're not going to necessarily have the same scope and breadth of impact in other experiences. But certain things I don't think you need to quantify, like number of hours. So I saw a lot with like number of hours completed at this site, versus another site. That is not as important, especially for like APPEs and IPPEs, since that's pretty standard across the PharmD curriculas. But yeah, those types of activities, if you can quantify, I think that would be strong.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if we have that data for ECMC, we should publish it. So the question about a resume in the chat, should you include IPPE rotations on a resume? Again, a resume, it totally depends on what you're applying for. So if you're a student applying for an internship, then yes, I would include things that are applicable to that internship. If you're applying to a job post-graduation, then again, include things that are applicable to the job, but you want to focus on sort of your highest levels of competencies. And typically an IPPE is not where you're going to have achieved your highest level of competencies. Maybe if you're say applying to like a managed care position and the only managed care experience you have is as an IPPE, then absolutely you should include it. But if you're applying to a managed care position and you did a managed care APPE, you did a managed care internship, you did a couple community pharmacy APPEs with applicable skills, then you don't have to include your IPPE. So it just depends on what you want to highlight for the position that you're applying. That's really, I think, the key for a resume. Sometimes you'll pull really weird things out from your history to just highlight, like, hey, you said in your job posting that you want someone that's got, like non-sterile compounding experience. And I did that this one place as a P2 student, right? You want to pull out as a P2, you were at maybe Pine Pharmacy and did non-sterile compounding all day for 2.5 weeks. Great. You can pull that out, you can boost that up, and you can present it because that's a skill that particular position you're applying to is looking for. So don't be afraid to do that for sure. Don't oversell, because you need to be competent at it, because they're going to ask and they're going to know if you are or aren't. But if there's things you can pull out from your history to highlight something for that particular position, you should do that for sure. Another thing I saw that's a good, I reminded myself of as you asked that question, is an objective. So an objective is typically found on a resume, and they're starting to make their way into CVs. I know like Dr. Albanese, like she asks for an objective on the CV. If you send yours to her, she'll say, hey, you should have an objective here. I think it's fine to include, it should be succinct. It should be like 3 to 4 lines. It should be very focused. This is, again, an example. On a resume, it's very specific. So my wife was applying for a pharmacy operations manager position. And so her objective was to practice as a pharmacy operations manager. And, in this type of environment with these goals. And so it was very focused to that particular position. On a CV, rather, it's going to be a little bit more broad. So your objective might be to, match at a PGY1 residency that you're excited about, and you're going to have to fluff that up a bit. But it can be there, and it can be, I think, well received. You just don't want it to be like this long paragraph that takes into career goals and your trajectories and all this other stuff. You want it to be pretty succinct. And the reason is, especially if you're applying to residency, you're going to write a cover letter. And the cover letter is going to have in it things like your career goals, your trajectory, things you've done, things you want to do, areas you want to focus on for improvement, areas to optimize strengths. All of that's going to be wrapped up in a nice cover letter. And so you don't want to detract from that with the objective here. But again, if you want to include one on a CV, I think it's fine. But it's typically more reserved for resumes. Another question in the chat was, is it okay to omit descriptions for jobs and APPEs? I think that's fine if you don't want to have the descriptions. They're not necessary. Had you asked me the same question 5 years ago, I would have had sort of the vice versa of that answer. I would have said, don't include them, but if you want to, it's fine. Nowadays, it's so many people are just accustomed to seeing them. They want to see them. So I would say it's the expectation that for the intern positions and your APPEs that a description is there. That is now the norm. If you don't want to include that, that's okay. But just know that whoever is reviewing your CV might think that you forgot to include it, or might think that it's not there for a reason. Maybe you didn't get anything out of the experiences. So I would encourage you to include one. That goes against the purist in me, because as you look at my CV, sorry for the scrolling, right? There's no descriptions. A CV, there's not a description on, right? It's just a list. I forget what curriculum vitae translates into in Latin, but it's something about, it's just a list. It's a list of your accomplishments. Anyways, I digress. They didn't change mine. Good, other questions? These are all good questions. All right, well, seeing no new questions in the chat and hearing no new questions over the line, I'm happy to stay on and answer any other ones that folks have, but at this point, it seems like we've hit our limit. So I thank you for coming and for participating. I would encourage you to take what we've talked about tonight, revisit, revise, create for the first time, whatever it is, the CV, your resume, send them out and about into the world to have people review them before you send them for real. And in particular for residency fellowship applicants, don't hesitate to reach out to me again. I'm happy to review it again. Different faculty, I know Dr. Slazak, Dr. Albanese, Dr. Hutcherson, either Dr. Prescott, Dr. Fusco, maybe not Dr. Fusco right now, but Dr. Chilbert, Dr. Daly, they're always willing to review your CVs as you approach residency and fellowship applications. So don't hesitate to reach out. But thank you, and I'll stay on for a few more minutes in case there's other questions. But
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.